The night was dark, and the air was thick with the smell of ash and blood. Kratos stood on the edge of a cliff, his hands trembling with rage. The flames of his past burned brighter than ever, and the memories of his family's death haunted him like a shadow. He had been tricked by the gods, used as a pawn in their cruel games, and now he was alone, carrying the weight of his sins. His once proud Spartan armor was now stained with the blood of countless enemies, but no amount of killing could wash away the pain in his heart. Kratos clenched his fists, his eyes glowing with a fiery determination. He would make them pay, all of them. The journey ahead was dangerous, but Kratos had no fear. He had already lost everything that mattered to him. His wife and daughter were gone, their faces forever etched in his mind. The gods had promised him power, but they had taken his humanity instead. Kratos was no longer just a man. He was a weapon, a force of destruction. As he stepped forward, the ground beneath him cracked, and the skies above roared with thunder. The gods were watching, but Kratos didn't care. He was coming for them one by one, and nothing would stand in his way. The first target was Ares, the god of war. Ares had been the one to manipulate Kratos, to turn him into a monster. Kratos remembered the day he had pledged his loyalty to the god, desperate for the strength to save his people. But Ares had other plans. He had tricked Kratos into killing his own family, and that was a sin Kratos could never forgive. As he marched toward the temple of Ares, Kratos felt the chains of his past tightening around him. But this time, he would break free. This time, he would fight not for the gods, but for himself. The journey had just begun, and Kratos was ready to unleash his wrath. The temple of Ares loomed in the distance, a massive structure of stone and fire. Kratos could feel the heat from the flames even from miles away. The temple was guarded by monstrous creatures, their eyes glowing with a fierce hunger, but Kratos didn't flinch. He had faced worse in his life, and fear was no longer a part of him. With his blades in hand, he charged forward, cutting through the enemies like a storm. Each swing of his weapon was fueled by his anger, and each step brought him closer to his goal. The temple was not just a place. It was a symbol of everything he hated, and he was determined to destroy it. Inside the temple, the air was thick with the smell of burning flesh. The walls were covered in carvings of war and death, a tribute to the god of war's cruelty. Kratos walked through the halls, his footsteps echoing like thunder. He could feel Ares' presence, a dark and oppressive force that seemed to suffocate him. But Kratos had come too far to turn back now. He had made a promise to himself, and he would see it through, no matter the cost. As he reached the inner chamber, he saw the altar, a massive structure of stone and fire. And there, standing in the center, was Ares himself. Ares was a towering figure, his body covered in armor that glowed with an otherworldly light. His eyes burned with a cold fury, and his voice was like the roar of 1,000 storms. "You dare challenge me, mortal?" he bellowed, his words shaking the very ground. Kratos didn't answer. He simply tightened his grip on his blades and charged. The battle was fierce, each strike shaking the temple to its core. Ares was powerful, but Kratos was relentless. He fought not just with his strength, but with his pain, his anger, and his grief. And in that moment, he was unstoppable. The clash between Kratos and Ares was like nothing the world had ever seen. The temple trembled as their weapons collided, sending shockwaves through the air. Ares swung his massive sword, each strike capable of splitting the earth. But Kratos dodged and countered with precision. His blades, the blades of chaos, burned with a fiery rage, reflecting the storm inside him. Kratos was not just fighting for revenge, he was fighting for redemption. Every blow he landed was a step closer to freeing himself from the chains of his past. The gods had made him a monster, but now he would use that power to destroy them. Ares laughed, a deep and mocking sound that echoed through the chamber. "You think you can defeat me, Kratos? I am the god of war. You are nothing but a pawn." But Kratos didn't respond. He had heard enough lies from the gods. Instead, he focused on the battle, his movements sharp and calculated. He remembered the pain of losing his family, the betrayal he had suffered, and the endless nightmares that haunted him. All of it fueled his strength, pushing him to fight harder. With a powerful strike, he knocked Ares to the ground, the god's armor cracking under the force. But Ares was not so easily defeated. With a roar, he summoned his full power, the temple itself seeming to come alive. Flames erupted from the walls, and the ground split open, revealing a river of molten lava. Kratos stood firm, his resolve unshaken. He knew this was his moment. With a final, desperate charge, he plunged his blades into Ares' chest, the flames consuming the god of war. Ares screamed, his body disintegrating into ash, and the temple began to collapse. Kratos stood amidst the chaos. His body battered, but his spirit unbroken. He had won, but the war was far from over. As the temple crumbled around him, Kratos stood amidst the ruins, his chest heaving with exhaustion. The body of Ares lay before him, reduced to nothing but ash and smoke. But there was no joy in his victory, no sense of relief. The weight of what he had done pressed heavily on his shoulders. He had killed a god, but the emptiness inside him remained. The flames of vengeance had burned brightly, but now they were fading, leaving only darkness in their wake. Kratos looked at his hands, still stained with the blood of his enemies, and wondered if he would ever find peace. The gods had promised him freedom from his nightmares, but Kratos knew better now. They were liars, manipulators who cared only for their own power. He had been a fool to trust them, and now he was paying the price. The death of Ares had not erased his guilt. If anything, it had only deepened it. Kratos had become the very thing he hated, a destroyer, a killer. As he walked away from the ruins, the skies above darkened, and a cold wind swept through the land. The gods were watching, and they were not pleased. Kratos could feel their anger, but he no longer cared. Let them come. He was ready. But deep down, Kratos knew this was only the beginning. The gods would not let his defiance go unpunished. They would send their armies, their monsters, and their curses. And Kratos would fight them all, not because he wanted to, but because he had no other choice. He had walked this path too far to turn back now. The road ahead was filled with danger, but Kratos was no stranger to pain. He would endure as he always had, for in the end, this was not just a battle against the gods. It was a battle against himself. The gods were not silent for long. As Kratos walked through the barren lands, the skies above began to churn with dark clouds. Thunder roared, and lightning split the heavens, a clear sign of the gods' wrath. Kratos could feel their anger, but he kept walking, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He had no destination, no plan. All he knew was that he could not stop. The gods would come for him, and he would be ready. But even he was not prepared for what happened next. A voice echoed through the air, cold and commanding. It was Zeus, the king of the gods. "Kratos," the voice boomed, "you have defied us for the last time." You may have killed Ares, but you are still a mortal, and mortals must learn their place." Before Kratos could react, a bolt of lightning struck the ground in front of him, sending him flying backward. He landed hard, his body aching from the impact. As he struggled to his feet, he saw them. The Furies, ancient beings of vengeance, sent by the gods to punish him. Their eyes glowed with a sinister light, and their claws were sharp as blades. Kratos knew this was no ordinary battle. The Furies attacked without warning, their movements swift and deadly. Kratos fought back with all his strength, but they were unlike any enemy he had faced before. They were relentless, their attacks fueled by the gods' power. Kratos was pushed to his limits, his body battered and bleeding, but even as the Furies closed in, he refused to give up. He had come too far to fall now. With a roar, he summoned the last of his strength and struck back, his blades cutting through the darkness. The battle was far from over, but Kratos was determined to survive. He would not let the gods break him. The Furies were relentless, their attacks coming from all directions. Kratos swung his blades with precision, but the creatures were fast, their movements almost too quick to follow. Each time he struck one down, another would take its place, their numbers seemingly endless. Kratos' body was covered in wounds, his strength fading with every passing moment. But he refused to give in. He had faced death before, and he would face it again. The Furies were not just enemies, they were a test, a challenge from the gods to see if he was truly worthy of their wrath. As the battle raged on, Kratos began to notice something strange. The Furies' attacks were not just physical, they were also psychological. They whispered to him, their voices filled with venom. "You will never escape your past," they hissed. "You are a monster, a killer. The gods will never forgive you." Kratos tried to block out their words, but they struck a nerve. He had spent years trying to outrun his guilt, but it always found him. The Furies were feeding on his pain, using it to weaken him. Kratos knew he had to find a way to fight back, not just with his blades, but with his mind. With a surge of determination, Kratos focused his thoughts. He remembered the faces of his wife and daughter, the love they had shared, and the life he had lost. He remembered the promises he had made to himself, the vow to never let the gods control him again. And with that, he found a new strength. The Furies' whispers faded, their power over him broken. Kratos roared, his blades cutting through the darkness with renewed fury. One by one, the Furies fell, their bodies dissolving into shadow. The battle was won, but Kratos knew this was only the beginning. The gods would not stop until he was destroyed. The defeat of the Furies was a small victory, but it came at a great cost. Kratos' body was battered, his strength nearly spent. He stumbled through the wilderness, his mind clouded with pain and exhaustion. The gods had thrown everything at him, but he was still standing, for now. Kratos knew he couldn't keep fighting like this. He needed a plan, a way to turn the tide in his favor. But how could a mortal defeat the gods? The answer came to him in a moment of clarity. He needed power. Power greater than anything he had ever known. Kratos remembered the tales of the Titans, ancient beings who had once ruled the world before being overthrown by the gods. The Titans were powerful, their strength unmatched. If Kratos could find them, if he could convince them to join his cause, he might have a chance. But the Titans were imprisoned, their bodies chained and buried deep within the earth. Freeing them would not be easy, but Kratos had no other choice. It was a dangerous path, one filled with peril, but it was the only way. With a newfound determination, Kratos set out to find the Titans. The journey was long and treacherous. Kratos faced countless challenges, from monstrous creatures to deadly traps. But he pressed on, driven by his need for vengeance and redemption. Along the way, he encountered others who had been wronged by the gods, mortals who had suffered under their rule. They joined him, their hearts filled with the same anger and pain. Together, they formed a small but determined army, united by a common goal. Kratos knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was no longer alone. And for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. Kratos and his small band of followers traveled for days, following ancient maps and cryptic clues. They finally reached the edge of the world, where the earth met the sea. There, hidden beneath a mountain of jagged rocks, was the prison of the Titans. The entrance was sealed by a massive gate, covered in runes and symbols of the gods' power. Kratos knew breaking through would not be easy, but he had come too far to turn back now. With a mighty roar, he struck the gate with his blades, the sound echoing like thunder. The runes glowed brightly, resisting his attack, but Kratos did not stop. As Kratos fought to break the seal, his followers stood guard, fending off the creatures that emerged from the shadows. The gods had sent their minions to stop him, but Kratos' determination was unshakable. With each strike, the gate began to weaken, the runes flickering and fading. Finally, with a deafening crash, the gate shattered, revealing a dark and winding path into the depths of the earth. Kratos took a deep breath and stepped inside, his heart pounding with anticipation. He could feel the presence of the Titans, their power radiating like a storm. The path was treacherous, filled with traps and illusions designed to confuse and destroy intruders. But Kratos pressed on, his mind focused on his goal. He could hear the whispers of the Titans, their voices filled with anger and sorrow. They had been imprisoned for centuries, their strength wasted in the darkness. Kratos knew he had to free them, not just for his own sake, but for theirs. As he reached the heart of the prison, he saw them. The Titans, massive and majestic, their bodies chained to the walls. Kratos stepped forward, his voice steady and strong. "I am here to free you," he said. "Together, we will bring down the gods." The Titans stirred at Kratos' words, their massive forms shifting in the darkness. Their eyes glowed with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. They had been betrayed before, and they were wary of mortals. The eldest among them, Kronos, spoke in a voice that rumbled like an earthquake. "Why should we trust you, mortal? The gods have deceived us before. What makes you different?" Kratos stood tall, his gaze unwavering. "I am not here to deceive you," he said. "I have suffered at the hands of the gods, just as you have. They took everything from me, and I will not rest until they pay for their crimes." Kronos studied Kratos for a moment, his ancient eyes piercing through the darkness. "You speak of vengeance," he said, "but vengeance alone will not be enough to defeat the gods. They are powerful, and their armies are vast. What do you offer in return for our aid?" Kratos clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had nothing to offer but his strength and his determination. But then he remembered the blades of chaos, the weapons that had been both his curse and his salvation. He held them out, the flames flickering in the dim light. "I offer you my loyalty," he said, "and these blades, forged in the fires of the underworld. Together, we will destroy the gods and reclaim what is rightfully ours." The ground shook as they stepped forward. their power radiating like a storm. Kratos felt a surge of hope. For the first time, he truly believed they could win. With the Titans freed, Kratos and his new allies began their march to Mount Olympus, the home of the gods. The journey was long and arduous, but the Titans' presence filled Kratos with a sense of purpose he had never known before. The earth trembled with each step they took, and the skies darkened as if the world itself feared what was to come. Kratos led the way, his blades gleaming in the dim light. He could feel the eyes of the gods upon him, their anger and fear palpable. But he did not falter. This was the moment he had been waiting for. As they approached the base of the mountain, they were met by the gods' armies. Countless soldiers and monsters, all determined to stop them. The battle was fierce, the ground shaking with the force of their clash. Kratos fought with a fury that seemed almost inhuman, his blades cutting through the enemy like a storm. The Titans, towering above the battlefield, unleashed their power, crushing everything in their path. It was a sight unlike anything the world had ever seen. Immortal and the ancient Titans united against the gods. But the gods were not idle. From the heights of Olympus, they unleashed their wrath. Lightning rained down from the sky, and the earth split open, swallowing entire armies. Kratos could feel the gods' power, but he refused to be intimidated. He had come too far to turn back now. With a roar, he charged forward, his eyes fixed on the peak of the mountain. The Titans followed, their massive forms shaking the ground with each step. The battle was far from over, but Kratos knew this was their chance. The gods had ruled for too long. It was time for them to fall. The battle at the base of Mount Olympus was chaos. The Titans, with their immense strength, tore through the gods' armies like a storm, their roars shaking the heavens. Kratos fought alongside them, his blades a blur of fire and steel. The gods, watching from above, could no longer ignore the threat. One by one, they descended from Olympus, their divine forms glowing with power: Zeus, Poseidon, Hades. Each god was a force of nature, their attacks devastating, but Kratos and the Titans stood firm, their determination unshakable. Zeus, the king of the gods, was the first to confront Kratos directly. His eyes burned with fury as he raised his thunderbolt, the weapon crackling with energy. "You dare challenge me, mortal?" he bellowed, his voice like thunder. Kratos met his gaze, his expression cold and unyielding. "I am no longer just a mortal," he replied. "I am your reckoning." With that, he charged, his blades clashing against Zeus's thunderbolt. The clash of their weapons sent shockwaves through the air, the ground splitting beneath their feet. The battle was fierce, each strike shaking the very foundations of the world. Meanwhile, the other Titans engaged the gods in a battle of epic proportions. Kronos fought Poseidon, the god of the sea, their clash creating tidal waves that flooded the land. Atlas, the strongest of the Titans, grappled with Hades, the god of the underworld, their struggle tearing apart the earth. The battlefield was a maelstrom of fire, water, and earth, the forces of nature colliding in a spectacle of destruction. Kratos knew this was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment when the gods would finally face the consequences of their actions. The battle raged on, the skies above Mount Olympus filled with lightning and fire. Kratos and Zeus were locked in a deadly duel, their weapons clashing with a force that shook the heavens. Zeus was powerful, his thunderbolt striking with the fury of 1,000 storms. But Kratos was relentless. He fought not just with his strength, but with the pain and anger that had fueled him for so long. Each strike of his blades was a reminder of the god's betrayal, and each step brought him closer to victory. As the battle intensified, Kratos noticed something. A crack in Zeus's armor, a small but significant weakness. With a roar, he focused all his strength on that spot, his blades striking with precision. Zeus staggered, his thunderbolts slipping from his grasp. Kratos seized the opportunity, delivering a final devastating blow. Zeus fell to his knees, his divine form flickering like a dying flame. "You cannot defeat me," he gasped, his voice filled with desperation. But Kratos did not hesitate. With a swift strike, he ended the life of the king of the gods. The Titans exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Finally, Kronos nodded. "Very well, mortal. We will join your cause. But know this, if you betray us, your fate will be worse than death." Kratos bowed his head, a sign of respect. "I understand," he said. With a wave of his hand, Kronos shattered the chains that bound the Titans, their massive forms rising from the darkness. The Titans, emboldened by Kratos' victory, pressed the attack, their massive forms crushing everything in their path. The gods' armies were in disarray, their morale broken. Kratos stood amidst the chaos, his body battered, but his spirit unbroken. He had done the impossible. He had defeated the gods. But as he looked around at the destruction, he knew this was not the end. The world would never be the same. The battlefield fell silent, the echoes of the gods' defeat reverberating through the land. Kratos stood amidst the ruins, his body weary but his mind clear. The Titans, their forms towering over the destruction, looked to him with a mixture of respect and awe. Kronos stepped forward, his voice deep and solemn. "You have done what no one thought possible, he said. "The gods are no more. The world is free." Kratos nodded, but he felt no joy in his victory. The cost had been too high, the destruction too great. As the Titans began to rebuild, Kratos turned his gaze to the horizon. The world was in chaos, its people frightened and uncertain. The death of the gods had left a void, one that would not be easily filled. Kratos knew he could not stay. He had achieved his vengeance, but it had come at a price. The blood on his hands, the lives he had taken. It was a burden he would carry forever. With a heavy heart, he turned away from the Titans and began to walk. His path uncertain, but his resolve unshaken. The journey ahead was unknown, but Kratos was no stranger to the unknown. He had faced the gods, the Titans, and his own demons. He had lost everything, but he had also found something, a sense of purpose, a glimmer of hope. As he walked, he felt the weight of his past slowly lifting, replaced by a quiet determination. The world was changing, and Kratos would be a part of that change. Not as a destroyer, but as a protector. The gods were gone, but their legacy remained, and Kratos would ensure that legacy was one of peace, not pain. Kratos wandered the earth, his footsteps carrying him far from the ruins of Olympus. The world was healing, slowly but surely. Villages that had once lived in fear of the gods now began to rebuild, their people working together to create a new future. Kratos watched from a distance, his presence unnoticed. He had no desire for glory or recognition. His fight was over, but his journey was not. He carried with him the lessons of his past, the pain, the loss, and the strength to rise again. One day, as he walked through a quiet forest, he came across a small village. The people there were kind, their laughter filling the air. Kratos watched as children played, their faces filled with joy. It was a sight he had not seen in years, and it stirred something deep within him.
He realized that his fight had not just been for himself, but for them. For the innocent who deserved a chance to live without fear. For the first time in a long time, Kratos felt a sense of peace. He knew he could not change the past, but he could help shape the future. Kratos decided to stay in the village, not as a warrior, but as a protector. He taught the people how to defend themselves, how to stand strong in the face of adversity. He shared his wisdom, his strength, and his hope. The villagers, though wary at first, came to respect him. They saw not the monster the gods had created, but the man who had fought to free them. Kratos knew he could never erase his sins, but he could use his strength to make amends. And in doing so, he found a new purpose, a new beginning. Years passed, and the world continued to heal. The name Kratos became a legend, whispered in stories and songs. Some spoke of him as a monster, a destroyer of gods. Others saw him as a hero, a man who had sacrificed everything to free the world from tyranny. But Kratos himself no longer cared about the tales. He had found peace in the quiet life of the village. His days spent teaching and protecting those who could not protect themselves. The weight of his past still lingered, but it no longer defined him. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Kratos stood atop a hill, looking out over the village. The laughter of children echoed in the distance, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. It was a simple life, but it was enough. Kratos had once been driven by rage and vengeance, but now he was guided by something greater, hope. He had seen the worst of the world, but he had also seen its potential for good, and he knew that as long as there were people willing to fight for what was right, the world would endure. As the stars began to appear in the sky, Kratos felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. His journey had been long and painful, but it had led him here, to a place of peace, purpose, and redemption. He knew his story would be remembered, not for the destruction he had caused, but for the hope he had inspired. And as he turned to walk back to the village, he whispered a final promise to himself and to the world. The gods may be gone, but their legacy will not be one of fear. It will be one of strength, courage, and the will to rise again. Kratos' journey teaches us that even in the darkest of times, there is always a path to redemption. His story is one of pain, loss, and ultimately hope. No matter how heavy your past may be, you have the strength to shape your future. Let Kratos' story remind you that even in the face of great challenges, you can rise, rebuild, and find peace.